I how to pronounce that. Can never pronounce his name. He brought in this term impetus, and it builds on what Philoponus was saying. He understands this term impetus. It's the first talk of a force being imposed. It leads up, it laid the groundwork for Newton's first law of motion, inertia. And he was saying the circular motion of the firmament and the stars, maybe they're kind of like when you throw a stone. Maybe they're moving because of some force. Maybe they're moving because of some force that's not all that different from the force that's on Earth. Robert Grosseteste also wrote about the role of the Creator in his two treatises. Albertus Magnus, St. Albert the Great. He was the first to interpret comprehensively Aristotle's philosophy. He was the teacher of St. Thomas Aquinas. He realized that you don't need these celestial movers, that there's nothing in Christian doctrine that says there has to be something moving the objects in the sky. But interpreting, he was a teacher, interpreting the views of the Stoics and Muslims through the lens of Christian faith, he rejected astrology, he rejected magic, art viewed for reason and investigation. And he wrote this encyclopedia of philosophical disciplines for his students. And this is the beginning quote. He is saying, "Praise Almighty God, creator, orderer, and governor of nature." So we're up to the 13th century now. This is about the time the Fourth Lateran Council reaffirmed creator of things visible and invisible. St. Thomas Aquinas says here clearly, so what did St. Thomas Aquinas do? He wrote in the Summa contra Gentiles, he was examining the Aristotelian philosophy from the Muslim world, and he combed through it. And he does this in Summa Theologiae as well. He is accepting everything from Aristotle that he can. He is only rejecting what has to be rejected because of Christian tenets. And some of those things are what we're talking about now. St. Thomas Aquinas says, it's right, Aristotle's right. You can't get to the absolute beginning in time by experimentation or observation or demonstration. You can't reason that on your own. You have to have that divine revelation. This is something that faith alone we hold. No demonstration can it be proved that the world did not always exist. And so that's how he teaches to reason. You start grounded in divine revelation. Just like a mathematician or a chemist or a physicist would say, you have to understand your tenets. That's why I studied dogmatic theology. You have to understand your tenets. You have to understand your premises, and then you reason from there. And we do, as Christians, we accept things that are divinely revealed that we would never have figured out. We wouldn't have figured out the Holy Trinity or the Incarnation. We wouldn't have figured out, St. Thomas is saying here, that there was a beginning in time. And then Etienne Tempier he was the Bishop of Paris, and he issued a list of 219 condemned propositions. They weren't binding on Catholics, but if you're not convinced by now that the Catholic Church, the Christians, all along, even from before Christ, were refuting the idea of an eternally cycling cosmos, he bang, bang, bang with 219 propositions for the intellectuals at their universities. He condemned, he rejected that the heavens are divine. I'm going to go fast, I'm not reading all these. He rejected that the world is an organism. He rejected that rectilinear motion is possible for planets and stars. He said the stars and planets might move in straight lines, and that there wouldn't be a vacuum left behind them. He condemned pantheism, that heavenly bodies, these are condemnations. He condemned that the heavenly bodies are moved by an intrinsic principle, which is the soul, like an animal. He condemned, or the condemnations were condemning that the celestial soul is an intelligence and the celestial spheres are not instruments of intelligence, but rather organs like eyes and ears. He rejected that the world is eternal. He rejected guarding here against, again, guarding against an eternal worldview. And there's 219 of these. I'm not going to read them all. But he rejected the reality, he protected the reality of time and the idea that God is eternal. God created in time. Things external to God had a beginning in time. He defended this. This is still before the scientific revolution, though. He guarded, again, the absolute beginning of time. He rejected, condemned that nothing is eternal from the standpoint of its end, that is not eternal from the standpoint of its beginning. And he said here that you can disagree with Aristotle and not contradict yourself. And asserted the beginning of the universe. Condemned the doctrine of the great year. And rejected that celestial bodies are the primary source of all matter. Some scientists today still think that's the source of all matter, but the stars are not the source of all the elements. The point here is that when you go through all of this, and I know it's tedious and there's a lot of details to it, but you have to give the supporting evidence. Faith gave the first breaths to modern science. Don't say that to an atheist unless you can back up what you're saying there, okay? I tried it. There's coffee spewing. But the atheist is right to challenge you on that. You know, if you can't just spit that out unless you can defend it. And that's where Father Yaki's work is so important. He did the defense of this. He looked up the ancient writings and put them down. They're hard to read. It takes me forever to read. A single sentence of his I could take and write a whole essay on. He puts so much into it. Sometimes he goes off on tangents because he knows so much. And it's hard to get through it sometimes, but this is what he gave us. He gave us the facts that support this statement right here. It wasn't experiments. It wasn't observation. It was faith. And then we get to Father Jean Buridan. He developed impetus theory then. He took what Chartres said, and he developed this impetus theory, and he did it with a brilliant scientific mind. You got to understand, he was saying something very new here. He was saying that we are going to go ahead and reject the Aristotelian understanding of antiperistasis. He absolutely refuted antiperistasis. He said that objects do not move because some mover is contacting them constantly. There is nothing in Christian teaching that says we have to accept that. We can refute it. But he says we have to refute it. And he came up with impetus theory scientifically. He said, think about it. If you have an arrow and you're going to throw an arrow, shoot it through space, if antiperistasis is true, if you shot an arrow that had a pointed end, it ought not move as far as an arrow that has a blunt end. Because if that medium is coming in behind it and pushing it, it should push it more. He said that doesn't happen. He also said the rock thing. He said when you take a child's toy, a top, and you spin it, it spins. There's no antiperistasis possible there because there's nothing coming in behind it. You can spin it and take your hands off. There's no mover and it's still spinning. He said people can stand on boats. That if antiperistasis is true, when the air moves in behind this huge boat and pushes it forward, it ought to knock the person off standing up there if it can push the boat. It's like he's reasoning through it, and it's scientifically. And he said the spinner's wheel will spin. He said if you put a blanket over the spinner's wheel so no more air can get into it, it will still spin when you take your hand off of it. So he was refuting antiperistasis in all these ways. And he said, this was the radical thing that people hadn't talked about before, there's no reason to believe there has to be a divine ether moving celestial bodies in perfect circles. There's no reason for us as Christians not to accept that the same kind of impetus or force that moves things on earth moves things in the heavens. And he also said in his scientific writing, God, when he created the world, because we all know that, right, moved each of the celestial bodies as he pleased, and he impressed in them impetuses or forces. And this is still long before the scientific revolution. But it was at the University of Paris where he was the rector for 3 decades. So his teaching had some influence with a great many scholars. In 1377, his theory, Father Buridan's theory, was formally proposed by Nicolaus, was adopted by Albert of Saxony in the 14th century, Nicolaus Copernicus in the 15th and 16th century, and Galileo Galilei in the 16th and 17th century, and then Sir Isaac Newton. So this worldview laid the foundation for modern science. That is the Christian contribution. It's the role in the development of modern science. There was an effective refutation of pantheism, unlike had ever happened in any culture before. It wasn't just based on, in the beginning God created, though. That's only part of the story. Christians couldn't say, maybe the beginning is the beginning of a new cycle, because of the Holy Trinity. In the Holy Trinity, we believe there's the Father, and the only begotten is not the universe. The only begotten is the Son. The monogenes, the unigenitas, which the Greeks and the Latin used, when they were talking about the universe, for Christians, it's talking about the second person of the Holy Trinity. That's part of the doctrine, that the Father begat the Son. And the other part of it was, and you see this here, we glorify the Father with thyself, with the glory which I had before the world was with thee. Talking about that the Holy Trinity acted together in creation. When you study the doctrine of the Holy Trinity, there's some talk about who we attribute the action to, but all three persons of the Holy Trinity work together. So the Father didn't create the world without, they're one nature. In Christ's prayer for his disciples, he says that I will that where I am, they also whom thou hast given me may be with me, that they may see my glory which thou hast given me, because thou hast loved me before the creation of the world. These are the scriptures that were used to defend the doctrine of the Holy Trinity. But there is also the incarnation of Christ. Christ is the only begotten Son of the Father. He's also the flesh and blood Logos, okay? Where the ancient Greeks had the Logos as the divine activating principle, not so in Christianity. It's a flesh and blood person who was born of the Virgin Mary, with a human and divine nature. And the Logos, so you put all that together. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth, but there was Logos, rationality, and only begotten Son of God. That Christians can never say, it's heresy to say that God begat the universe. The universe is not the only begotten of God. And there's a certain very moving scientific significance to the first words in St. John's Gospel. At the beginning of time, the Word what already was, and God had the Word abiding with him, and the Word was God. So when you put all of that together, you look at the world the way every scientist today does. You look at the world and you expect there to be order upon order and upon order. And this is why I want science majors to know this, because when you're breaking your pencils over the differential calculus and the quantum mechanics and the eigenvalues, and you're trying to understand probably where the electrons are, even as you're talking about wavelengths of light, and if you do work like I did, you're talking about where you do know where the electron is, and you know you don't. But when you're doing all of that stuff and you're manipulating matter and energy, it's easy as a scientist to lose sight of how profound it is what you do, because you're often talking about atoms and molecules or proteins or biochemical processes or cosmology. And it's easy to forget that for my heart to beat one more time, a whole lot of things have to happen. And we know a whole lot of things at the atomic level that do happen. And where did that come from? The most logical thing in the world is to say that there's a creator. And I tell people, when you're going to evangelize through science, you don't hear a lot of people say that, but science is something we should be evangelizing through. Get to that point where you ask the person who loves science the most, who did this? Like, where's the biggest answer to the biggest question of all? Why is this here? Why are we here? And I think it's pretty natural, and it happened to me, that to ask who did this. Here's the list of scientists. But this is why there are so many Catholic scientists. But it's not just this list. There's the Pontifical Academy of Sciences. There's the Vatican Observatory. With two of their directors have spoken here before. And there are all the students in the Catholic universities studying science. I talked to many of them. There's so many out there. I've been teaching at Colby Academy the last 4 years. 2 of my students are here. We sit in class together for hours every week. And now I've only seen them online, and now they're right here with their mother. Wait, hi, Joyce. I've been working with them, and I've never seen them in person. But I teach this way to young people, and it changes the way they see it. I have literally lost count of the number of high school students who have gotten back in touch with me to tell me that they're going to become scientists because they're so excited. They get it. There's a reason for all of this. There's a reason to learn more about it. There's a reason to add something to scientific knowledge with your lifetime. And of course, there was Father Lemaitre with the Big Bang. It's another lecture. But he didn't say there had to be a beginning in time because his faith compelled him to. He was also willing to look at calculations that assumed an eternity in time. So I tell students that it's okay for equations and assumptions to be made about an eternally existing cosmos. Stephen Hawking just had something released this last week, and I got all these emails. Oh no, what do you think? Like, it's okay. It's okay. First of all, he's not saying there wasn't a beginning of time. He's saying there is. And he's just saying there might have been something before the Big Bang. And it's okay to look at that. We should look at that. We should have the confidence because our faith tells us there's a beginning in time anyway. Let them look. The more they say, for the science to work, there has to be a beginning of time. Yeah, we know that. It's okay though. And it's a calming effect on the whole thing. There's no faith and science conflict when you understand this story. There's none at all. What there is a conflict in is understanding and communicating, and that's where we need a whole new army of young scientists out there. We need Catholic students to become scientists so they can do good things for humanity and understand the handiwork of God better. Because we have some pretty serious issues in our time. We're still in the scientific revolution, I think. We're still trying to figure out what it means to be human based on evolution. And Catholics absolutely, and they do, should dive into these questions without fear. You can explore everything you want about evolution and see what the scientists are saying. You can still believe there was an Adam and Eve. They're never going to find Adam and Eve digging in the ground. Okay, it's just not going to happen. It's okay, just let it go. You can still believe it though. There's no contradiction there, but you got to understand what you're talking about when you get to evolution. I know that's what the last lecture was about. But there's a lot of things going on bioethically. This is another reason. So I never give a talk without pleading for young people to become scientists. Catholic young people, we need you to become scientists, please. I worked for 5 years at DuPont. I left, I met my husband. I left my career because I heard about the open to life thing as Catholics, and we have to believe these laws because, when somebody says to a chemist that God knows how many hairs are on your head, you're like, yeah, and he knows how many atoms are in all the keratin in my head too, and all the electrons. You believe that, and I took it seriously. And I tell young women who talk to me about becoming scientists, I only worked for 5 years. And then I decided to stay home and raise children with my husband. He gave me the choice, and I decided this is what I'm going to do. And it was the best decision I ever made because now I got to buy a library about Father Rigaki's work and study talk about it. But, he said, maybe you'll find some other things that you like besides science, because that's all it was about for me at the time. And I became Catholic. But there's some serious issues. The global communication, I put it in this list because the more the internet crams us all up in each other's face, the more